Good morning, everybody. Maybe a little line about myself, so you know what I'm doing here as well, instead of just joining these two lovely women and talking about their work. My name is Matthijs Wouter Knol. I'm, as the name says, Dutch, originally a producer, moved to Berlin 14 years ago and have worked there for 12 years in the leading team of the Berlinale, but also moved recently to the European Film Academy. So if I'm not a girl, I'm still pretty new. And an interesting thing is that, of course, within the European Film Academy, we do work as well with the amazing things that the BFI has been doing in the past decades, I would say. But I think specifically, and you've pointed that out, also in the past couple of years, interesting things going on. It's interesting that we have to change language, actually, during this conference to start speaking about things that we all would like to reach as well, which is, I think, for many people in this room, an interesting experience. It's great that you're here. And I think even though you've presented quite a bit already of what you've been doing, even in the short time that you've been at the BFI, but also the work you've done before, Mia, and you, Mel, in the years that you have been at the BFI, and especially the work that the inclusion team, as I will call it, has set up. I'd like to ask you a few things. I prepared a lot of things, but actually listening to you, I felt, well, first of all, time is not enough to talk about all of that, and there's more opportunities after that. I think it's also interesting to speak about a few things that you mentioned, both of you mentioned. But before doing that, I also want to point out that Agnieszka Moody is also here in the audience. Hi, Agnieszka, who is the head of industry and international policies. Yeah, why did I forget international? So also together with Mia and Mel, there's Agnieszka in the room as well to speak about if you have other questions later on during the day. Coming back to the points. What I thought was very interesting, also linking a bit to results of the study that was presented yesterday by Professor Elizabeth Prommer, the discussion we had yesterday, the films we watched, was that you both talked about building up inside the organization also a structure in which you can do work that actually has an effect. So you talked about transforming an international culture. You talked about trust, but you may also spoke about bringing your own experiences and your own also emotions into the work and letting them guide you in really making this work in the long run, and not just because you feel it has to be done because everybody does it. Could you maybe say a bit when we talk about internal culture in the BFI and transforming that? You've spoken a bit about the challenges, but could you both say a bit about what you found when you actually came to the BFI as well, and where you also feel that the image of the BFI, I think particularly on the continent in Europe, also here in Germany, as a bastion of where things are done right, how you feel the challenges are very particular and very maybe also big, where things can still be massively improved. Mia, or?
Oh, thanks. Tiny question. Yeah, I mean, I think part of the perception of what we're doing is true. Like, the diversity standards, if you think about what they represent and tying them to our funding, that was a huge thing. It was a very bold thing for our Ben Roberts, who is now our CEO, but was the head of our Film Fundd at the time, for him to kind of make that stake in the ground and say that. So I think the fact that we've been doing that work for a little while now and kind of consistently, and that's what I was talking about like not having initiatives that you sort of do something and go, oh God, that didn't really work, and you move on. Like having something that, like the standards, that frames the work of diversity and inclusion in industry is incredibly powerful and very useful. That being said, I think we're ahead in the UK more generally around talking about these things. I think we have a language to be able to talk about diversity and inclusion. So in that respect, and that is the beginning, is that you're talking and conversing and figuring out what needs to be done. But I think we still have the same issues as everybody else. We still have lacks of representation. We've made moves in some places and not others. So I think that work I don't think this, ultimately what I'm trying to do is work myself out of a job. Like, I shouldn't exist. What people should take responsibility for this work, embed it in everything that they do. So until I'm out of a job, we haven't fixed anything, right? So I think that's important to note. And I think in terms of the BFI isn't old. We're going to be 100 in 10 years. So that makes us 89, 90 now. So, we're an old, big institution. So with that, personally, when I first started at the BFI, I'm a Londoner. I've always lived in London. I walked off the tube and walked into the building and was a bit like, there's not many of us, right? Like, that was really stark to me. And that's a challenge. That's kind of an interesting thing, but it's a reflection of the industry, our institution. And we're also a sort of government body, so it's this kind of equinox of craziness, really, in a lot of ways. So I think that is beginning to loosen. I think just in terms of, I think also inclusion was always seen as something that was done on the side. So we'd get a lot of kind of, oh, can you just like do the black thing, or that, like someone's talks, you speak to them, I don't know what to do with them. I think that is changing, and in the roles that we're moving into and the team is moving into, and that cultural change to me is about consulting. It's not for us to pick up, to use our budget to fix things that haven't been done or have fallen down somewhere else. It's about the kind of making sure that you're doing things in the right way, but that it's your responsibility to do them. So I think that's definitely beginning to shift as far as I can see.
Yeah, and there are loads of really interesting new changes, like Enrique Oke is now the new head of the National Archive, and she's coming from the Black Cultural Archive, and I think, as far as I'm aware, that's the first time in the UK a black woman has been the head of the any national archive. So, and then the work and her lens, that's incredibly exciting. That's exciting then to me too. Then how do we then inspire filmmakers to look at our archive with a different lens, with someone who will open the doors in a different way? That's really exciting. Like we, in terms of like documentary use or other use, how do we repurpose archive? So there's loads of, the overview that the BFI has is really, and the data that we have, that's what I'm really looking at the moment. Like where are we doing well, and where are the gaps in terms of on-screen and behind the camera representations?
I'm asking it also because I think in the discussions that we have and will have probably in the next days to come, but also in, I think, individual organizations or companies that people in the room here are working for, representing. The question is often, well, it seems, today is one of the examples, it seems people are willing to sit together and to talk about this because it has dawned upon them, or the light is shining in, as you said, this is something we need to work on. The way I phrase it is already maybe a bit like, why do we need to work on it? The question to that is not always easy to answer, I think, to everybody. But very often the question leads to, well, we've been speaking about it, I think, specifically in the past 2 years, and things have been sort of like speeding up a bit also in Germany. But the question also becomes, where do we actually start, and where do we see change? What is a project we could start with? Who's going to do that project? Now, both of you have given examples of how to do that, but you've also shown, Mel, that the team that you're building up, it's actually, for all the work that you're doing, not a very big team. So could you give concrete examples of where, of course, with you coming in was one, I would say, a kickstart of that, but where you would say, listen, that was a very concrete thing you can start with as an organization?
I mean, I think the intent is a good place to start. I think intent is better than not caring about doing the work at all. So, and I do think conversations are important. So I think for a long time, we were really scared to talk about these things because we don't understand, because it's a really fast-moving subject in terms, and there's lots to it. As I said, we're talking about everybody and very and people's identities, and people are that feels very close to people's hearts, and it's very sensitive. So I think conversation is good because you need to get rid of the fear of not speaking about these things. Speaking to communities, as I was talking about, is also good to understand. If you're kind of sitting there going, well, it doesn't affect me, or I don't understand what the problem is, or I don't know where to start. If you reach out to communities, or you hire people from those communities, is also, I think, is what's happened more so at the BFI. You just get those different perspectives and different ideas about how to do things that you might just not know because you're used to doing things a certain way. So I think that's really important. And as much as I sort of poo-pooed initiatives, but I think, doing something. So identifying where there is a problem and thinking, how would I do that differently? What are the barriers that are in place? Sometimes it is really simple. Like I was saying around, if you're an actor, a lot of the acting schools are in London. They cost a lot of money. If you want to audition for them, you have to pay. You'd have to travel. If you don't have money, that just becomes something that you can't do. You might have to pay to audition 10 times and not get a place. So I think it's re-evaluating how we do things and understanding how we are creating barriers to people to being able to come in. And so identifying those problems, and that is stuff that we can all do, because if you just sort of step outside of your perspective for a minute and think, well, if I didn't have money, or if I live somewhere else, am I going to come and do that? Is everything that we're doing at the South Bank in our cinemas, is it only London people that get to look at that stuff? So if it is, how do we do something differently? Do we put things online? And I think the pandemic shows you. I went a whole 10 minutes without saying pandemic, but it showed us how quickly. So we've been talking about inclusion for a long time, going, it's so difficult. I just don't know how we'd ever change anything to make that different. We were all working online in 3 days. So when you want to change something, when a problem becomes real and immediate, you do something about it. So I think just do something, whatever that is, however small it might seem. If it's for one person, if it's for 10 people, if it's for 300 people, do something, and you can always build on that.
Yeah. Me also coming to that, what Mel just said, I think with the work you just described, you did before the BFI with Bird's Eye View films. I mean, that sounds a bit also like, from a situation which you feel this needs to change, and then putting in maybe also not even huge amounts of money in places where actually it had a huge effect. That experience that you have with Bird's Eye View film, I mean, can you say something about how you also can bring that to the BFI, or how also in the next coming years, maybe you feel that small things could actually have a huge impact?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think the way that we framed that, because there are lots of people, doing small actions here and there around, gender equality for ages. But we were a group of insiders, industry insiders, so we knew the language to use that would work, and language is incredibly important. It's divisive and it's inclusive. And so we knew that if we framed this point to the industry in a commercial way, i.e., you're leaving money on the table because there's audiences hungry for work, and we can help connect those audiences, and we can bring bigger audiences in, and we know how to do it, and we've got a specialism, and we know that you just haven't managed to do it. Instead of shaming and naming, doesn't work. Just go, look, we can help you, and then the doors, the relief that came with that from people. If we'd have approached it in another way, which I saw other activists do, shouting, angry, it's exclusionary, and it just doesn't help. And we may all feel it in private spaces, so that's why you need different spaces in which to speak. So how this space operates is incredibly important. Do people feel safe in it? Who is everybody? You kind of need to know. And you need to use the right language to bring people into it. And people have to also, you have to have the space for dissent. You have to allow for people not to agree and to say, this is okay. This is really okay. We need to not agree. We need to be okay with conflict and all walk out still being friends. The problem is with diversity, inclusion, equality work, it's very emotive. It's lived experience or lack of lived experience. And language is incredibly important. How you frame it. So the big work, I would say, is make sure you get the right words. And and develop that's the best way. That's the most effective thing you can possibly do.
We've one of the things that we've done this year is create preferred language documents that are on our website. So a lot of the work that we do, we try and make freely available, because we know that that's an issue. People sort of say, well, we get the same questions about how to refer to groups or the right language to use. So we just made them for LGBTQIA+, we made them for race and ethnicity, for disability, and that's just stuff that we will look at every year. We talk to, as I said, community groups about what the right language is, using the social model of disability and changing all our documents so that we have that. That's been incredible. I mean, that's just 3 PDFs. But it's incredibly impactful because we can just send that out to people who are asking questions. We're all talking the same language internally now, which feels a lot safer and a lot nicer, that everybody knows what the language is. So that is incredibly important, but really, really simple intervention that's had massive impact internally and externally, because we can just hand those resources out.
Maybe turning things a bit around, and I want to also let you know that, of course, this is, as you said, a conversation. So I'm going to open the floor as well to all of you, because I'm pretty sure there's some questions from the audience. When you've been coming to Tutzing and you've been invited to speak here, and you are, I know if you've been traveling in Europe in the past years, because we had the pleasure of meeting at some other occasions as well. Mia, you've been, around, I would say, and you also within Europe, I think, there's a lot of change and differences, most of all, between countries and regions when the topic of diversity and inclusion is addressed. What is your feeling, what is your image of how things are in the German-speaking world or in Germany? Could you say anything about that? Do you have any idea when you compare it to what's going on in the UK? Like, how do you look at Europe in that sense?
I mean, I think coming at this work from a sort of data point of view, I'm really aware of the sort of socio-political context in Germany that makes, as I said, we have the benefit of legality and terms that we can use, and the ability to speak about race, for example, that I know is really difficult here, and in terms of the work that we can do in monitoring and data slightly more easily. So I'm aware of like the sort of the worry about that, and I've had many conversations with people in Germany and across Europe around, well, but you can do these things, and so that's easier for you, right? So I think I'm aware of that kind of conversation, and but it's also just really interesting to have this. I guess, as I was saying, like, we're further down the conversation in the UK. So there are some people who are sort of like, oh, we've got this fine. We've been talking about it. Like, we understand. So actually, it's really nice to come into this context and people to be excited about what I have to say, because that doesn't always happen in the UK. So that's quite nice. They've heard it all before. So, that I think just like we're really interested to be here and learn, because I think there's always things to learn, even if people feel like they're not as far ahead with their journey on this, and even just that understanding of that context, and it allows you to think creatively about inclusion. So like we have the benefit of being able to say, well, we can ask people questions about their identities, but where you can't, knowing that you can't do that in some territories always makes me think, well, what can you do? And like, what about what I'm saying can you take away? Or how would we do things differently if things change for us? So that's a really interesting exercise in thinking creatively about inclusion, which we should be doing anyway, because it's a creative space.
I would slightly flip my answer to that and say that, for me, equality, inclusion, diversity is all, it spans many, it has many lengths and breadths, and one of those is kind of European co-productions. That's another form of inclusion, kind of conversations across time, space, and for instance, I was just looking back at how often we'd made German co-productions, and there's been one in the last several years. And for me, then we're not doing very well. I won't put it on German funds and German filmmakers or producers. I think, why are we only making one? So that would be my question to us, and to state clearly here, like we need, especially post Brexit, you know, that's a big important message for us. You know, we really are open for business, and we're really interested in making films that aren't in the English language and have other identities and representations. And, you know, so that would be, that's a big part of why I'm here, to kind of put that message across and say this is also part of that conversation.
Good to know. Maybe also looking at Agnieszka, who's also in the room. Would you like to add anything to that, Agnieszka? Not sure if there's a mic, otherwise I'm going to give you mine.
Come on down.
Go.
Seamless. It's like we'd never practiced.
Seamless prompt into international team. So I work in the international department, and I'm a bit of an old girl and a new girl as well, because until Brexit, I used to work at the Creative Europe desk, which obviously closed, but now was given a new opportunity to contribute to the international work of the BFI, which is fantastic, because now it's really about the world, Europe being a very important part of it. And as Mia says, the international is absolutely seen as a massive opportunity for the BFI, and actually one small silver lining of this tragedy of losing the family of Creative Europe is that we have a new fund which is specifically supporting co-production. So Mia's job is to support all film, national, international, for good causes. But next to that fund, now there's another pot of money which is specifically for co-production, and co-production where UK is a minority partner. This we haven't done before,
nope.
that explicitly. So that is going to be quite a game changer, I think. And I hope that in years that we come to sit on those panels, we will have more to show for in terms of collaboration. Because international is another expression of diversity. All of us have sort of home and elsewhere. And that's the space that I'm terribly interested in, because these are the interesting stories that we can hear from those elsewhere places, not your home. Just a small anecdote that one of the very seasoned producers in the UK was sharing that thought with me, that they are sent a lot of screenplays by new upcoming filmmakers. And she's a very great believer in co-production as well, because she says it's about sort of expanding your gene pool. That when you read those screenplays that are kind of written and conceived of just within the UK, it's a bit samey and smaller. And by working with others on co-productions, you can expand that outlook and end up with more interesting stories. So we're absolutely up for it.
Okay, thank you. I think it's time to see if there's questions in the audience. You've just said, Mel, that you're also here to learn. So I'm pretty curious what will come out of the room, and also the next day will come out for you to learn from this part of Europe as well. I'm just going to point out hands. I see a hand of Elizabeth Prommer, and I saw another hand as well. But maybe Marvin, maybe you'd like to start?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much to the insight. It was really exciting to hear you speak. I have a question. You have addressed it already, but I just want to make a point of it, because we had a little bit of discussion yesterday evening that having diverse stories, inclusionist stories, is sort of poison for success, or might be hindering of quality. I mean, you showed us some of the examples, so I would say not really, but could you point into more? This is sort of the fear. It's like, oh, if we tick all boxes, and then who wants to see the story? And, you know, we've been successful with what we've been doing. You've been talking about risky business. Risky business always is, okay, we do what we did because, you know, it's a lot about money. So could you talk a little bit more about that argument? Is it really against quality, and is it going to destroy quality and success? I would be interested in hearing that.
Yes. Well, first of all, I would ask, who's actually asking that question? And it's often will be revealing who is asking that question, and I would put money on I would know, right? And because it's exclusionary language immediately. You know, it's got implicit bias in it, and if you're open to equality and diversity and inclusion, you don't even ask that question, and that's the problem. Like this, underrepresented identities and voices have always been put into that bracket of, but it's a risk. But the thing is, we're in independent film. Everything's a risk. It's just inherent in what we do. It really is. And, like great world cinema successes are always like, on the whole, fresh stories. They're not doing what Hollywood does. Hollywood does a different thing. We all have domestic, markets also that do a very particular thing, maybe have quite broad, a broad approach and don't travel. And those are often, sometimes those can be the diverse stories because they're the fresh ones. They're the ones that no one's heard or seen before. And so, risk is a really, it's a tricky word, I think, sometimes, that actually, so that's why, it's inherent in public funding and subsidy that it's about embracing risk. It's also embracing risk of form and approach and all of those things, because that's all we really have. We can't compete otherwise, so it's about embracing that as a positive part of the narrative, and anyone who frames it in a different way is inherently othering and needs to be challenged for that. And we can give lots of examples of how actually, those kind of stories are really, really commercially viable. But you have to have someone with lived experience. That's why, like, the diversity of who's making the decisions is incredibly important, or rather their mindset. It's not always inherent in the bodies of the people doing the work, because that's too much as well. It's also about, the perspectives and the work that the decision makers do on themselves.
Yeah, I think, and my question is similar to Mia's, but like, who decides what is quality? So I think, we've been living in, the film industry is a history of exclusion. It's a history of a small number of people making a decision about what quality is and what defines stories that should be told and what that quality is. And historically, other people have been excluded. So if they are not up to the quality, it's potentially because those opportunities haven't been there for them to tell their story over years and years and years. So I think I'm really interested in this idea of sort of dismantling canon, and because it's through a perspective not only of the people that are making the films and were allowed to make the films, but also the critics that are talking to you about how good those films are from a very specific lens. So this idea, dismantling that idea of what quality is and who deserves to be represented, is kind of key to doing this work, and just sort of throwing that out and starting again is kind of where I'd like to get to, really.
Marvin, and then we go further. I've seen your hand.
First of all, thanks. It was a really, really fascinating, lots of information to process. You mentioned audience development a few times, and I just wanted to ask if you have, apart from specific film distribution and production examples that you are proud of like community-based work for film culture in general, or for venues and cinemas and festivals. That would be really interesting to know if you have something to share.
Yeah, the Audience Fund at the British Film Institute is who invested in Bird's Eye View and Reclaim the Frame. And they invested a lot of lottery funding, again, in community outreach groups. So across the protected characteristics, across people with lived experience of across the spectrum of disability, across the spectrum of race and regionality as well. And those are specifically, they're investing in the work of people to bring audiences to films that they think are specifically, may not know about the movies, because we all know that it's really hard to, it's one thing making the movie, it's another thing that the audience to whom it's really intended, or the primary audience, to even know about a film and to even be able to afford to go and see it at the cinema. That's a whole other aspect of diversity and inclusion work, which is really important. Socio-economic challenges, literal physical access into buildings. Lots of people are excluded. And so that's where a lot of work comes from the Audience Fund, and it's very community grassroots led, and it's been really transformational, actually, really transformational, because it shows distributors and exhibitors that actually there is an audience and there's money, going back to the point I made about how we framed our work right at the start, that there's money there and your cinema will be full. So you can show Batman and it might play for a few days over a weekend, but actually the midweek business may be terrible. And what you could be doing is show a really, really specific film, maybe only one show that's really important to our community, and it will be full, and then the cinema will go, oh, okay, look at that. But it is that bespoke, and it's really incredibly important that we as makers and commissioners we have to think about the end point, and so do filmmakers. And I feel like filmmakers often get off the hook in not having to think about their audiences, and we can't afford to do that anymore. We really need to be that bespoke and that tailored.
Bitte schön.
Thank you very much for the very good speeches and dialogues. Just now, I observed that the themes, the subjects, are very concentrated on Europe. What do you inspire the dialogues from London and so on with Asia and Africa? Because it's very important worldwide. But thank you very much for the inspiration. My name is Eka Bruchner, Director for Interfilm Academy. We are also worldwide, and I'm very happy to be here now and to listen. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would say, incredible. World cinema is incredibly important. All kinds of representations are incredibly important to be in the room, in the frame, represented here in our minds, and with, even though we may be specifically talking about UK and Germany, of course, like cinema, the world is really quite small, ultimately, is it not? And actually, the best stories are often, we get very bogged down in kind of nationality sometimes, I think in Europe, particularly around public funding. And actually, we need to move away from that, actually, because we have such diverse populations now that inherent within our populations are incredible stories and collaborations with around the world. And so I think for me, in my job, I really want to stop having this big focus on English language. You know, English language, we don't just need to make films in English in the UK. We really don't. So that would be a really important point. Like, we need to recognise that we have many languages in the UK and across Europe, you know, and that's exciting because actually we won't have seen those films. You know, there's really incredibly important collaborations with subcontinents, you know, across the world. And yeah, I'm excited about that.
And the BFI is also a cultural institution, so it is within our remit to bring the world cinema into the UK. And this is the great work of our other colleagues in the program department who do exactly that through our offer, through our own cinemas, the venue in London, through online and through our publications department, we provide or try to provide this very diverse diet of world cinema to citizens, but also to, what very important point, to filmmakers in the UK. They have to be exposed to those different voices in different languages. So that they can be creatively richer and end up with better stories to be told.
Sherry Hagen. And I saw one other hand, or did I miss it? Because I think there's two more questions. So this one and yours in the back.
Yeah, hi. Thank you for the keynote today. I'm Sherry Hagen. I'm a filmmaker based in Berlin. I just wanted to know this simple because I'm really happy to hear that there are going to be more co-productions between Britain and Germany, which I find very interesting, also with minorities, which is also very interesting. So I just wanted to ask, as a simple filmmaker, do you need to have a production company on your side in order to approach, or if you have a story or a project, does it have to be set in England or parts of Britain, or have one of the main roles have to be British? So that will be very interesting for maybe for the filmmakers here in the room. What exactly do we need to bring in order to be in order to have a co-production?
Do you want to start now?
Sure. For the Film Fund, you do have to have a UK producer to access, and there are certain qualifications, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in English. So there are two kind of frameworks. There is either it is about a British producer getting a kind of international experience and broadening their remit. That is one focus for us. Or it could be also an international filmmaker wanting to make a film in English for the first time. Or it could be that it's a natural collaboration across several territories. So that's particular to the Film Fund, but the Global Screen Fund, which is the other fund, is different, and that's minority co-production.
So just to explain the minority, because I think we risk maybe misunderstanding. Minority UK meaning that the UK partner is the smaller partner and the project is led primarily by a co-producer in a different country. That's the meaning of minority here. And that means that it is quite likely to be a story which is set elsewhere. And somehow the connection is mutually beneficial to join forces with the UK and creatively make it a collaboration. But the project would be led by a producer in a different country. So that's how they very nicely complement each other, those two funds. And just a very quick plug that obviously for this other fund and several other sources of funding for co-production in the UK, let's not forget there's other agencies that also can be your partners. There will always be a need for a UK co-producer. And you know this with any other country, that it's best to have someone from that country rather than do it alone, approach funders in different countries. So you'll need partners. And can I do a little plug for summer? Because we are here also to sort of explore opportunities of bringing several UK co-producers to the festival in summer. And then I hope those communication channels will be open and you will be finding it easier to then approach the people with purse through your UK contacts. So watch that space, what we managed to cook up for the festival in summer.
Nice little plug, Agnieszka. Diana, you want probably to continue with this plug.
Yeah, I'm very happy that you say that. For this, everyone needs an industry accreditation and has to buy one. I'm Diana Ilgen, the festival director of Munich. And a few years ago, we are donating an important prize for German production. One of the major players of production houses came up to me and asked me, is that prize actually still a German prize? Because we had a Mia Hongzhou winning, and we had a Nemo Mitrovic winning. They are all on German film schools, and they won the prize. And for me, it was so shocking that this awareness was not there. It was my last evening. I was exhausted anyway, so I said, if you ask that, I'm not going to talk to you anymore. So she came and apologized, but when you say you need to address the industry and to create an awareness, what would you do? I don't have time in my daily life to call such a person or to call her boss. I want to keep that prize and that sponsor also and not complain. How do you do these things?
I mean, yeah, I fully understand about exhausting conversations about diversity and inclusion. I think, it's a very personal thing. Some days I can be bothered to have that conversation and sometimes I can't. So I think you have to protect yourself first and foremost. But I think it is also about leading by example. So, if you just keep doing it's as long as you're not bending to those perspectives and staying true to the work and how you believe things should be done and can be done and showing the success of that work, that's as much as you can do. That's what I'm interested in doing at the BFI. If we can get our house in order and I can, hold that work with my chest and our, our perspectives with everything that is my being and talk about that and feel proud about that, then that's enough for me. I think that's, you can't change everybody's mind. That's just not going to happen. So don't try. Don't exhaust yourself.
Can I just quickly add? I know we're trying to wrap up. Yes.
Sorry.
I would sleep on it always sleep on it, or save to drafts if it's an email, and then reevaluate it.
Yeah.
Take all the anger
Take all the
out,
swear words out.
because one gets very frustrated in this work because you just think everyone should know, and you can't think like that. Actually, you have to approach everything with kindness and go, where's the need in this person? What's their need really? Their need is the same as yours. Always start with, what's your need here though? What's the fundamental point? And the fundamental point actually may be a good one, but they're coming at it the wrong way. And it helps to de-escalate. Yeah, always de-escalate.
So very practical tips and do's and don'ts, I would say. I think there's a lot of more questions, but we don't have time because I've been already signaled a couple of times to really cut this panel off. So I would invite you to actually, I think there's a break now, right? So to continue and meet with Mia and with Mel and with Agnieszka and to speak with them. You're going to be around until tomorrow, so there's plenty of opportunity. Thank you so much for joining and have a good break.
Can I just say thank you so much for inviting us, because it's super important
Thank you. It's
for us
wonderful
to
to be here.
Time for a break.